Hi there! In this video I'm going to teach you how to take EVA foam and make it look like fake leather to make satchels and a belt and all that for this character specifically. I'm going to put an image here, hopefully. I'm going to teach you how to kind of make a rough butcher paper template and turn that into the final piece that looks kind of like that. Yeah, here we go. Alright, first thing to do is create our template. I am creating this as a throwaway template from scratch on butcher paper, as I don't need to keep this around and create multiple versions of this belt. I like to use a piece of armor that I'm already done with to get sizing right, and then I can kind of proportion everything off of that. I'm heating my EVA to flatten it out so that I can transfer the initial belt piece to the EVA, and then I can kind of get a good eyeball of where everything is going to sit on the belt. An important thing when you're creating templates from scratch to make sure that things stay consistent is finding your middle point and relying on symmetry. So I draw multiple of particular pieces as I'm drawing armor detailing onto a piece of butcher paper, but I only ever really use one half of my template, folding it in half and then getting symmetrical pieces coming out the other side. So now I'm getting rough locations on where on the belt the satchels are going to sit. And I'm also getting appropriate widths that I can turn into the initial structure of the belts themselves. The sizing is all relative on the image that I'm looking at on my monitor. So I know what the width is respective to the size of belt that I have, and so I can make the height and everything accurate from there. And you're going to start seeing me folding everything in half here to get the accurate symmetry, or as accurate as this method can be. Alright, so all of our pieces are cut out, and I'm going to start transferring the bag pieces to foam. So the way that I use this initial one side to form a bag is going to start making sense once we get to the undercutting section. But essentially, you can have the primary piece of the satchel all as one continuous piece, and then you just have to put the walls in. So that's just taking the front and the back, that's the same dimensions on the bag, and then putting in your top and your bottom, and then the flap, and that's all that you need to get a leather bag going. So I'm cutting out the sides here. This was, again, kind of eyeballed from some of the side profile shots of Heavy Mando to see the rough width of those bags. Alright, and that's one set of bags down. I'm going to repeat the same process for the other bag. You'll see that this one is a little bit thinner. The bags on the outside of his belt are about ½ inch less wide. Particularly nice shortcut I like to do if I'm cutting out multiple complex pieces. If I'm using these single squares to create larger pieces with the folding of the bags. Just doing that process once and then taking the first cutout EVA to just transfer directly for the second and then toss the respective lines on there. It's a little quicker than repeating it. And that is all the bags. Now I'm just cutting out his little belt buckle. And what looks like to be some sort of grenade. And some satchel charges of some sort. So I'm planning on cutting out multiple of these, and then I'll barge them together and then sand them down to the appropriate shape because they're sort of curved. So with barge, if you haven't used it before, important to be in an area with good ventilation or have a respirator on. I have a respirator on as I'm doing this. And you just spread it over to the on the surface you intend to bond, and make sure it's evenly spread. And then once it stops being quite as shiny, it starts getting kind of a tacky look, you're able to press them together and they will fuse for all eternity. Next up, I like to go over all of my edges and clean them up with a Dremel. I have a preference of not only doing that on the sides, but also going through on all of the corners and kind of lightly removing the 90-degree corner to a 45. That's personal preference. I just feel it looks a little more pleasing to the eye when you have a full set of armor, kind of avoiding those harsh, somewhat unrealistic edges. You can get around needing to do this as much if you sharpen your blade frequently as you're cutting out foam. I tend to be a little bit lazy about that and just kind of hack it out and then clean it up in the Dremel stage. Alright, so this is undercutting, or under dremeling in this case. So with this method, you don't need to cut out in multiple pieces and glue or barge them together. You end up flipping over your piece, and this works for anything. Bags are a very straightforward way to share it. And you're on the inside, and you essentially remove enough foam such that it can easily bend at a 90 degree or more angle. And so when you fold it over, it looks as if it's potentially separate pieces, or you get angles that are impossible just from heat forming by relying on those valleys that you've dremeled out. So now I'm going through and dremeling the accessory pieces to form. Just kind of roughing it in here. I'll take it over to the belt sander and get a little more consistent. Shortcut for this, if you don't have a belt sander and you want to save yourself a little bit of time, is to buy foam dowels. They're available in basically every cosplay shop nowadays. I just didn't have any on hand, so I just made it myself. So I'm going through and doing that cleanup of the edges. Again, pretty much personal preference on that. I just prefer the way that it looks with the 45 degree kind of dremeled out there. Alright, now the core of the fabrication is done. So from this point, all that we need to do is barge stuff together. So I'm applying barge to the what's going to be the sides of the bag and the edges of the front, bottom, back, and top. And I like to kind of get a conveyor belt situation or assembly line going where I apply the barge to multiple pieces, and then as the first is drying, I'm able to come back and combine everything together, and then kind of move down the line, letting the barge kind of dry. A helpful tip when you are doing any sort of undercutting, you can use hot glue to support any odd and crazy bends that you have in place on your armor. It'll just kind of hold it into position a little bit better. It is a negative space, so that works a little bit better than just relying on barge. You can kind of fill that negative space with hot glue. Alright, we're just about done. I'm going to go through now and clean up any of the parts of the sides that are kind of inconsistent. I'm going pretty quickly and rushing on this. You can always be cleaner when you're barging your seams together. And I was not very clean on this because I knew I was going to Dremel it smooth and sand it smooth. So I wasn't too pressed with making sure that everything was clean and consistent. So after I've Dremeled, I'm going through with 220 grit sandpaper and sanding all the big burrs down and all the kind of Dremel lines and things. This is a little bit optional with EVA foam. It depends on the type of armor you're making and how organic it is. But I like to Dremel, do 220 grit, heat seal to remove any of those high edges, kind of burn them off and seal the cells of the foam. And then I'll go back over that with 400 grit to get a pretty consistent texture. It's never going to be as smooth as the normal top of an untouched EVA, or if you're using something like epoxy resin or Epsilon or something. But it does the job pretty well. Alright, now we're to the point where I need to add the flaps on. At this point, you could make these bags functional. My Goblin Slayer bags are completely functional and follow the same sort of strategy that I'm using on this one. The only thing you would need to do with that is to Dremel a small inlay in the flap and in the main body of the satchel, and hot glue or barge a couple neodymium rare earth magnets in there. Then it'd close just fine, and you'd be able to use it to keep your phone in at a con or anything. I'm not planning on needing a whole bunch of storage space on this build. There are pockets in his flight suit, so if I do take it to a con, I'll have a place for my phone. So just for simplicity, I'm go ahead and gonna barge all of this stuff shut. You can see on that detonator there that was a super quick craft foam wrap on that cylinder that can immediately sort of give the look of this is a charge in a kind of leather holder, and it just takes 10 seconds to wrap it with craft foam. It's all about the kind of treating the edges afterwards and selling it in the paint. I'm doing the same thing on these, I don't know what they are, little devices. I'm just kind of very quickly cutting out rectangles and wrapping it around. They're going to be affixed to the belt, so I don't need the back to be pretty, I just need it to be flush. Yeah, you get kind of the same look, like they're going to be sitting in a leather pouch. Alright, everything is fabrication done, and now it's time to use a tip that I picked up from Evil Ted, and that is to damage and score and press your EVA with some loosely wrapped aluminum foil and kind of get that leather texture on there. So the tip here is it's going to vary a lot depending on the type of EVA foam you have. Some EVA, especially cheaper EVA from like a Harbor Freight, is going to be a lot more susceptible to kind of warping when you're pressing a texture into it. This is pretty high quality EVA that I'm using, so I needed to really press in to get those scores in. And because of the way that EVA works, if you reapply heat to the area that you just kind of damaged and pressed into with the foil, it's gonna bounce right back. So you gotta time it appropriately such that you're pressing in and you kind of finish with everything looking consistent. And that is just about it. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, let me know, and I will try to answer everything that I can. Thanks.